Well, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the hot lead zone. And the title of this video is the assessment and evaluation of a scope mounting job. You see a lot of scopes on a lot of rifles, and we're not talking about the quality of the scope or the quality of the rifle here. We're talking about how the scope was mounted. Now, of course, it does make a difference between the quality of the scope and the quality of the rifle, because the higher the quality, the better mounting job that we want to have on that, and the better mounting job that we would expect. You wouldn't expect to see a quality scope and a quality rifle and the mounting job is really kind of haphazard and shoddily done. So let's look at the job that was done in this case. Now suppose you got the mount job done by a professional gunsmith. You would evaluate it according to the following criteria. Suppose your rifle was one of those that had a factory mounted scope already on there, and they say it's bore sighted. Well, again, you would use the same criteria to evaluate how the mounting was done. It should be done well if you've got it done by a professional gunsmith or by the factory. Or if you do it yourself, or if a friend does it for you, you still have to apply the same evaluation criteria. Now, there should be no damage to the gun, because when the scope mount base is put on, you've got to take out screws that are in the receiver or the barrel, and you've got to take those out without causing scratches, deformations of your gun. Or when the mount base goes on, you don't want to have damage to the gun caused by slippage and bad handling, this kind of thing. So that should be a given. Are there any scratches, dings, or damage done to the scope tube in doing the mounting job? If you see scratches, that is really a tragic thing, because what it means is there was slippage of tools and bad handling, not becoming the job that we're doing. Now, it really helps to have knowledge and experience doing these things. And if you don't have that, by all means, do a lot of reading of the instructions and look at YouTube videos, this kind of thing, before you even try to do these things. Case in point, these loopholed rings encircle more than 180 degrees of the scope tube. If you try and just push these on, they will scratch the scope tube's finish. What happens, you snap it on and you'll scratch the finish, then you slide it over to where you want it, and the scratches are right there in plain sight. A definite no-no. The way you put these on is you expand the rings, either by inserting a little nail in here and on the other side, and you squeeze the nails together to expand the ring and slip it on, or if you can do it with your fingers, that'll work too. But you don't get any scratches that way. Once the rings are on the scope tube, they'll slide back and forth without causing any damage to the finish. Also, on the mounts themselves, is there any scratches or damage to the mounts? What kind of mounts are being used? Now, in this case, we have a worn scope mount base. Now, some bases are integral with the rings, like the DNZs, the tallies, this kind of thing. But these are separate bases and separate mounts. These are worn scope mount bases. That's all steel. So that makes a difference, because when you have an all steel mount, it means you mean business with that mount. Also, the rings are all steel. And these happen to be Leupold quick detachable scope mounts rings. And the way they work is you loosen it by unscrewing these, and you put them on the left hand side, and then when you mount it onto the scope mount base, you tighten them up and they do not move, plus they're reproducible in 0. So this is nice if you use the same worn rings on other rifles. This will pop right on, and you can use the same scope on different rifles. Kind of a nice idea. Anyway, there's no damage to the rings. Now there should be no damage to the screws used to tighten the rings. You'll see damage to the screws or to the rings around the screws. Not a good thing to see. Now of course there should be no interference of the scope with any part of the gun. And that applies to the barrel, to sights, to hammers. This kind of thing should have clearance. And that's a given, but you need to look at that. Now we need to evaluate the height of the scope above the bore axis, because if it's excessively high, then we've got to make arrangements to raise the comb of the rifle to compensate and allow for a good cheek weld for the shooter who is using this setup. Now one thing we should ask when we have a rifle with a scope setup is that, was there a good vise used to stabilize the rifle when the scope was put on? And if we're doing it ourselves, then we can use something like this. This happens to be a Caldwell lead sled. Now there are fans of the lead sled and there are detractors to the lead sled. And the use of the lead sled is going to be on another video, of course. But the lead sled can also double as a nice platform to do gun cleaning at home, and also to do some light gunsmithing work like mounting scopes. And one very helpful thing is to put in a rubberized towel to make the connection of the stock in this pocket even better to do the work that we're doing at home, whether it's gun cleaning or putting a scope mount on. Now as for the actual mounting of the scope itself, the principles are that you want the scope to be directly above the barrel. Now that might imply that the scope is also in axis with the action, but it's the barrel that's the important thing. If the scope is off axis from the barrel, then you have introduced automatic errors at distance. So you want the scope to be directly above the barrel. You want the crosshairs in the scope to be vertical once it's above the barrel. And there are various types of outfits that you can buy to assure that you're getting, by the use of levels and this kind of thing, that the scope is above the barrel and above the bore axis, and that the scope reticle is vertical. But here's something you can do if you don't have that kind of thing. Some of those instrumentation are on the pricey side. Get yourself an ordinary level like this and place it right on the turret housing. And if you got a big enough turret housing where that can sit on there, all the better. Then you can go ahead and adjust the rifle so it's absolutely level. The turret housing is absolutely level. Then once you've got the levelness of the scope, then you can go ahead and view from directly above and look from different aspects to see that the scope is directly above the barrel. Now I would caution you to make sure that the action is open and there is no ammunition anywhere when you're doing this alignment test. So you see there's the bore, there's the scope. Now notice where the edges of the scope are, and you'll see that that's equidistant to the muzzle. And there's the level is still right there on the level. So you want all of that to be directly in line. And that's what you want. Now I'll give you another look at that. There's the muzzle. There's going up the barrel. There's the optic in focus. So you can see the idea behind establishing the scope being above the barrel when the scope is level. Then the last thing you do is you bore sight the scope to a distant target. Now the edge of a distant building is good to use because you've got a good vertical there also. And here you see the bore-sighted telescopic sight right where the edge of the building is. So in actuality, all you shooters and reloaders out there, when you have a chance to mount a scope for a friend or family member, it's a great chance to get together and show them how you do this, how you choose the right size screwdrivers, how you administer the screwdrivers not to damage your work, not to cause any damage on any other part of the gun. And then when you're all done, you've got a professionally mounted job, and then the shooter takes that rifle to the range and fires the first shot from your bore-sighted rifle, and the bullet hits the black. How nice is that? And how many points do you score socially when you do that for somebody? And that's opposed to, say, doing a scope mounting job for a family member, and then you return that rifle with a scratch on the stock or the scratch on the scope that they paid a lot of good money for, and then when the shots are fired, doesn't even hit the paper. Shooters and reloaders out there, take care. Best to you. From Fortune Cookie, the Hot Lead Zone, bye for now.